This is the Inferno, RuneScape's hardest challenge. Originally, it kinda sucked. Let's find out why players voted it out of the game entirely, and how it got reworked so perfectly that those same players made the Inferno the most viewed event on Twitch. Let's go back in time to October 2015, long before the Inferno we know today was even a concept. Somewhere in a Jagex boardroom, the team realized something. A piece of content released exactly a decade ago was still the hardest thing in the game, the Fight Caves. It's a series of 63 waves with one big final challenge, Tis Talk Jad. Anyone that's ever tried the Fight Caves knows how nerve-wracking it is. After pretty much every attempt, I guarantee your mouse is covered in sweat, and if you failed, maybe tears. But really, after a few completions, you get the hang of it. Even so, Jad is a rite of passage for most RuneScape players. You have to fight him in order to get the elusive Fire Cape, an item that at the time was the best in slot melee cape in the game. So the team decided to pitch a new challenge at RuneFest 2015. It was simply titled the Fight Caves Expansion. At the end of the Fight Caves, after defeating Jad, you'd have the option to continue on with the caves. The floor would cave in, and in this new cavern, you'd fight more waves of monsters, multiple waves of Jad, and eventually Jad 2. Rather than receive a fire cape, you'd receive one of 3 capes. Each cape would be the new best in slot for melee, magic, and ranged. At the time, the best in slot item for range had been released in 2006, and mage even earlier in 2003. The team figured, why not just update them all in one big super challenge? Now, 2015's RuneFest was jam-packed with updates, and Jad 2 was given one slide and about a minute of discussion, so the reaction was kinda meh. Most players just didn't care. I mean, who would when things like Zaya, resizable mode, Slayer bosses, sailing, achievement diaries, and way more was talked about. In January of 2016, Jad 2 was brought up for the second time, but yet again, it was overshadowed by being part of a massive Zaya blog post. The blog itself didn't really give us much new information either, so again, meh. But then, Jagex pulled it, and that's when the player base erupted with complaints. First of all, the fight caves are kind of boring. Jagex themselves admitted that the caves are beyond easy once you've done them once. Nobody wanted to have to repeat the entire caves just to have to do more waves before getting to Jad 2. It wouldn't make Jad 2 any harder, it would just make the build-up boring. What makes it even worse is Jad 2 would drop the previously mentioned 3 best in slot capes. But here's the thing, when defeating Jad 2, you'd only get one, so you'd have to defeat him 3 times to get all of them. Not to mention, none of the capes had a design yet, so players were pretty much blindly voting on them, hoping that they'd look okay. Anyway, when the Fight Caves expansion was pitched at RuneFest, the team said that it would likely take a month, at minimum, before anyone would be skilled enough to defeat it. I know the Fight Caves look like you're in hell, but this update sounds like actual hell. An hour of boredom, an insanely difficult portion, and then if you're part of the 0.1% of players who can actually defeat the boss, you gotta do it all over again twice. Not to mention, we didn't really even know anything about the expansion. We knew its rewards and a vague structure, but the boss itself still didn't have a name. It was pretty much only referred to as Jad 2. So it had no real name, no mechanics, and not even a picture. But then 2 days after the poll went live, Mod Alfred tweeted out a picture of what Jad 2 would look like. And I don't know about you, but wow, it's not what I expected. This T-posed blender blade was kind of the final nail in the coffin for Jad 2, but players did see the potential in the update. So a big chunk of them voted yes, hoping Jagex would listen to their feedback. Now, this was back when you could see how a poll was performing before it closed. So once everyone realized it probably wouldn't pass, the team actually announced that they'd be revising the content and be putting up a new poll for it next week. In the end, it just barely didn't pass with a 72.5% yes vote. Keep in mind, the entire question was packaged together into one big mega question, so it's either you voted yes for everything or no for all of it. Just a few days later, the first developer blog for the Inferno went live. It was the new name for the Jad 2 challenge, but it was kind of just the same exact update. The only new info we learned is that 22 waves would follow the Fight Caves, and Jad 2 would be named Tis Call Zuck. All 3 capes would still be a reward, and you'd still have to redo the Fight Caves on every attempt. At least we finally had an idea of what they'd look like. The team also said that by leaving the update as an expansion, they would save a ton of time, which made the player base even angrier. Nobody wanted RuneScape's hardest challenge in over a decade to be a rushed out extension. So 2 days later, Jagex released another blog. This time, the Inferno would be its own separate challenge with 40+ unique unique waves and 6 new monsters. This time, only the melee cape would be a reward, but the team asked the players a really weird question. Do you want the Inferno to release next month or next year? By changing the Inferno to be a piece of standalone content, Jagex would need to cut a few corners, namely with the graphics. A February release meant that the Inferno would probably be just mostly reused assets, like pretty much all of the early old school content. But if they pushed the Inferno to be part of Zea's third batch, which was also set to release in January, they could spend more time on it. If so, the Inferno would instead exist on Zea with its own volcano. If you've seen my video about Zea's absolutely insane development, you might have heard of the Tasakal, an ancient race of creatures similar to the Tazar who live in a dormant volcano on Zea. They were also set to release with Batch 3, and Jagex wanted to tie their lore together. Ultimately, the players decided on the January release, so they'd be waiting about a year. The Inferno wasn't really discussed much again until 2016's RuneFest, which was a few months later. First off, the Tasakal, which were first shown off in 2014, had been redesigned from this to this. Essentially, in the middle of the night, these weird centaurs kidnapped some Tazar, dumped them into a volcano, and did some weird experiments on them. So the player would then pretty much help the kidnappers and defeat their experiments for them. Anyway, after that, they displayed a few ideas of what the cape might look like, but ultimately told the community to pitch their ideas to the team, which might have been a mistake, because while researching for this video, I'd say at least half of the posts I found about the Inferno were player-submitted designs of the cape. January rolled around, and the update had actually yet to be pulled or really even mentioned since then. Much of Zea's Batch 3 had either been postponed or cancelled, but luckily the Inferno hadn't. 2 months after the Inferno's planned release date, we got the first blog for it in over a year. And if you thought the JAD 2 blog got revised a ton, just wait until you see this one. First up, the Tasakal were renamed to the Kalith. Man, Jagex just loves to pick names that are hard for me to say. Anyway, the Inferno would also be released with a little town surrounding it named Brimstone. In it, there'd be new thieving methods, fishing spots, and Kalith citizens would drop Kalith armor. 2 days later, everything I discussed was cancelled. Sort of. The team decided, you know what, maybe the Inferno does fit better back in the Tazar city. The Kalith and Brimstone were entirely cancelled. In the new developer blog, the new training methods survived, but were renamed, and the Kalith armor was also renamed to Obsidian armor. With the renaming complete and the sudden movement back to the Tazar city, the team decided that it was time to pull everything. Rather than pull it in one big mega question like last time, they decided to split it up into multiple pieces so that people could vote on what they actually wanted. This time, pretty much everything passed with flying colors. We got a few more blogs, live streams, and Q&As about the Inferno, but they pretty much told us nothing. Mod Kieran, the designer, was keeping all the mechanics as secret as possible. All we got were short videos of the Inferno's monsters and a finalized Infernal cape design. In May, just a few weeks before the Inferno's release, Jagex invited a few of the game's most popular streamers to come test it out. There was a slight controversy about who was invited though, because Woox, well known as being one of the best players of all time, was not invited. Ultimately, Foe survived the longest and reached Wave 63 with a little over 2 hours spent in total. Jagex hadn't released the exact number of waves yet, but he was still far from the finish line. It was really starting to sink in just how difficult the Inferno was going to be. Then Jagex made a pretty special announcement. When the Inferno released, the first few players who could complete it were going to be rewarded greatly in real life. The first player to complete it successfully would receive lifetime membership, a real-life Infernal cape, and a ticket to 2017's RuneFest with their travel and stay expenses paid for. The second would receive the same, minus the real-life Infernal cape, and third would just get a RuneFest ticket and lifetime membership. I should also probably mention the streamers who got to try it early were not allowed to claim these prizes should they be the first, so people who were mad Woox wasn't invited to test the content were suddenly quite a bit happier. June 1st arrives and the Inferno finally releases. Jagex is just buzzing with energy. Inside the office, hundreds of employees have various streams open of players trying to complete it. Tens of thousands of players were also watching, which was enough to boost Old School to the most viewed game on Twitch. The entire update was massive for Old School's exposure, and whether they planned it or not, this was a genius marketing strategy. All eyes in the gaming community were on Old School's near impossible new challenge. As the hours rolled by, players started to complete higher and higher waves. But 6 hours after launch, launch, nobody had completed it yet, and over 4,000 deaths had occurred. Nobody had reached the final wave, 69. I'm not kidding, that is seriously the final wave number. But as players got closer to it, they were horrified by what Kieran had added to the waves leading up to it. Now, on wave 67, you fight Jad, which isn't too bad. Oh wow, that rhymed. In order to even access the Inferno, you had to sacrifice a fire cape, so everyone had done Jad before. But then you get to wave 68, where you have to fight 3 Jads at the same time. About 7 or so hours after the Inferno's release, Dead Wilson was the first player to reach wave 69. Originally, he was one of the people invited to test the Inferno, but he died on the lowest wave out of everyone else. So this was kind of his redeeming moment. Tizkal Zuk erupts from the shield, and in less than a minute, Wilson had died. It became extremely obvious the final wave had no room for air. Stay behind the shield at all times or get potentially one hit. And if that's not scary enough, at points throughout the wave, multiple sets of monsters would spawn behind you, and eventually one of those monsters was Jad. Just when it seems like you're about to beat Zuk, healers would spawn. If you don't tag them fast enough, they heal Zuk crazy fast, and if you don't kill them fast enough, they damage you crazy fast. 24 hours later, nobody had been able to do it. Wooks had streamed the Inferno for almost 13 hours that day, but still hadn't beaten Zuk. Almost 48 hours later, still nobody had done it. But then, after a nearly 2-hour attempt with tens of thousands of players watching him, Wooks was the first to complete it. The clip of his completion was the top post on Old School's subreddit and even hit the front page of Reddit. Finally, the Inferno had been completed, and just a few months later, Wooks was awarded his prize. Now, a couple times throughout this video, I mentioned Zaya, RuneScape's biggest expansion. Its development was plagued with drama and all sorts of delays, and it was nearly cancelled. So if you want to see the video I did on that, the link should be on screen right now, along with a link to my second channel. I hope you enjoy.